right, that is the question we are starting with this morning is what is your story going to be? If you have your Bible, I want to encourage you to turn to Exodus chapter 3. And we'll be in chapter 3 and chapter 4 this morning. If you use the Bible app, you can open that up and hit the events or hit the menu tab and then go to events. And you can find the Grove Church. We'll be on there. It'll have all the sermon notes and everything on there. While you're turning, I'm assuming nobody needs this because I was supposed to mention this like 2 weeks ago and I forgot. But we found this key fob. So nobody came asking for it, but if you're in need of a key fob, it's here. So I'll leave it right up here, and if this is anybody's, it's got this little pink thing on the bottom of it. So anyway, that's there. I was supposed to mention that a few weeks ago. We found it, so maybe somebody will want their key fob back. If not, I'm just going to start sending somebody out. We'll walk through. We'll figure out whose it is, and we'll get in your cart. No, that would not be good. Just joking. But we're really glad that you're here this morning, and I'm excited to kick off this teaching focus. And as you're turning and flipping, you all know I'm a sports person. So this is obviously a basketball, and I can't spin it on my finger at all, so I won't even try. But when it comes to playing basketball, I feel like I have average ability. I mean, I'm good enough. I can step on a court and feel like I can kind of hold my own and do okay. I'm realizing that I'm getting a little older, and I can't play like I did when I was, 18, but I'm learning. You get wiser as you get older. So when I play with the younger guys, I'm a lot smarter than they are, so that makes up maybe where I've lost a step. But I put this basketball in my hands, and I can do okay things with a basketball. But you put this ball in the hands of, say, Michael Jordan, and it's amazing the difference. The exact same ball in somebody else's hands is so much better than it is in my hands, right? Or probably for any of us, if I threw you the ball and I said, hey, catch Dylan. Yeah, see, he's right. I knew he'd catch it, so you can just keep it. Or same thing with the bat. I'm not going to throw the bat, I promise. But if I put the bat in my hand, I'm an average baseball player. Like I could hit anything that's not probably going over 70 miles an hour. You take this bat and you put it in the hands of, say, somebody on the Atlanta Braves team, and it's $1 million bat, right? I mean, it's completely different. Same bat. Well, they'd probably have a wooden one, and it'd be about that much longer because this is my son's 8U bat. But you get my point, right? You take a bat and you put it in my hands. It's average at best. Not going to make $1. But you put that bat in somebody else's hands, it's going to go a long way. Now you say, why do you say all that? I want you to think this morning when it comes to your story and the journey of your life that you've been on. There's a couple different perspectives that we typically adopt when it comes to thinking about the story of our life. One of those is a story that you've come to believe. It's how your interpretation of your experiences, your journey, your relationships, your circumstances, your highs, your lows, all that stuff. It's your interpretation of how that has shaped you and made you who you are today. So you have that story. Some of us buy into that and we believe that, and that's what we're convinced of. There's another story that forms our lives that's kind of shaped around what other people tell us. So it's other people's interpretations of our story, our journey, our experiences. And what people do sometimes is because they don't like their own story, so they try to make your story their story, and they'll try to intervene in your life and direct you in a certain way so that you actually are living out their story through your life. I know it's weird, but we do that to people. And so maybe the story you've come to believe is actually a story that somebody else has convinced you of about your own life. So usually, when we think about our story, it comes through one of those two filters. But for today and moving forward, what I want to really challenge you on is thinking about the analogy that I started with. What if you took your story and instead of putting it in your hands or somebody else's hands, what if you took your story and you put it in the hands of God? Because you see, my story with me as the focus and my story through my understanding is limited. It's going to be not even average, I would say, for me. Your story through somebody else's perspective is always going to be jaded by what they want or what they see. But you take your story and you put it in the hands of God, and that's a game changer. Everything changes. Your story takes on a completely different feel, different perspective, a different meaning. When you see the twists and turns of your life being guided and directed and cared for by the sovereign creator of this universe, you begin to realize that your story has a divine purpose. It has meaning. And so as we step into this over the next few weeks, I want you to begin to think about what is my story and how much am I convinced that God is the author of that story? And am I realizing what he's wanting to do in my life and what he's pulling me towards and what he's cultivating in and through my life? And I want you to see that every single one of us, that your story is like a thread in this never-ending tapestry that God is weaving together. And every single one of us have a part to play in that story. But the thing that we have to realize about the story when we place it in God's hands is that we are no longer the center of the story. We're no longer the hero in the story. That is Jesus. And when we put our hands in God's story, Jesus becomes the centerpiece. But that's good news for us because that means we don't have to be the centerpiece. That means the world doesn't revolve around us. That means all the pressure is not on us. We get to walk in the freedom and the grace and the hope and the truth that comes through a relationship with Jesus Christ. And for me, that's freedom, right? I mean, that feels a lot better than having to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders, right? I don't know about you. Maybe you like the weight of the world on your shoulders. I don't. I like walking in the freedom of Jesus and in that relationship where he empowers me. But here's what happens a lot of times, though. We get so caught up in the mundane, routine, everyday grind of life. Here's what I got to go. Here's my story. This is a story I've been believing for the last 40 years about my life and all this stuff. We get so caught up into this story that's absent of God being the author. It's no wonder that we lose touch with our relationship with God. That we lose touch with the things that really matter most. So he wants to bring us back into that place where we're seeing him as the author of our story and we're letting him write that. So that's the invitation as we get started this morning. Let's take a look at this and let's start paying attention to the story that he's wrote out for us. And so here's the big idea that we're going to unpack this morning. All right, if you're following along with your notes, here it is. It's the big idea we're going to unpack. And this comes from Exodus 3. It's this. It's that in God's story, you can because he is. In God's story, you can because he is. Now, you've got to kind of fill in a little bit because I know that's kind of a vague statement. So you got to kind of fill in a little bit. So in God's story, you can. I don't know what it is that you can do. I don't know what it is that you need to do. I don't know what it is that God's prompting you to do. I don't know what relationship maybe it is that's hurting and you're wondering, can this ever be fixed? Do I need to continue on in this? Whatever struggle it is, maybe it's a sickness or a health-related issue, maybe it's a job issue. I don't know what it is, but I want you to know this morning, you can, but you can not because of you. You can because of him, because he is. Where you feel weak, he is strong. He is your strength. He completes you. Where you feel incomplete, he comes alongside, and he is the one that pieces us together. We read in the Colossians, it tells us that it is he, Jesus, that holds all things together. So yeah, this morning you may be thinking, I can't. Well, the truth is you can't, but he can, and he is capable. Where you feel unable, he is able. And that's the author of the story. That's what God's inviting us into. So for you to begin to think about what is it in my life, maybe it's past, present, or something that you're looking ahead in the future, and you're looking at that and you say, well, I can't. I don't want you to focus on you. I want you to focus on him. He's the author of your story. He's the creator of the universe. He's our Lord and Savior. You can because he is, fill in the blank, whatever he needs to be based upon whatever it is that he's calling you to do. That's the good news this morning, and that's what we're going to look at in Exodus chapter 3. So we're going to get introduced to a guy named Moses this morning. You may, depending on how much you've been around the church and in the Bible, you may or may not be familiar with Moses. So let me give you just a quick background on Moses, just so we're kind of all coming at it from the same angle. So Moses is a pretty prominent figure in the Old Testament. And Moses was actually born during a time when God's people, the Israelites, were actually in slavery underneath Egyptian rule. And the Pharaoh of the land was really feeling threatened by all of the men who were who were multiplying and just being born over the generations. And so that the Israelites were starting to get close to outnumbering his people. And so he was feeling really intimidated by this. So he said, here, I've got a great idea. Let's kill all the newborn babies that are boys. Yeah, great. Wanted to live in that culture, right? And so that was the plan. He issued this out. Well, Moses is born, and Moses' mom says, well, I don't want my son to get killed, so she sticks him in a basket, because that's what good parents would do, right? You stick your kid in a basket, and you put him in the river. Okay, so she puts him in the river, and long story short, the lady comes by, picks up Moses, and says, oh, baby in a basket. I don't see this every day. I'll care for the baby. So she starts caring for the baby, and this actually puts Moses into like this royal family within Egypt. So now Moses, who's supposed to be killed, is kind of in this royal position now, and he's growing up in this royal family within Egypt. Hey, pretty cool. Nice story that's playing out here. Well, one day, Moses is kind of watching things happen, and he sees this Israelite, this Hebrew, that's getting beat up, and so he's like, that's not right. So he goes and he actually jumps in and he kills this guy, and Moses freaks out because now he's killed somebody. So he runs away, and we fast forward, and Moses is now living life. He's went from this royal family to now hanging out with sheep. And that's where we find him. So we pick up in Exodus chapter 3. I kind of summarized his whole life in like 1 minute. So there you go. So if you never heard of Moses, there's Moses. All right. So now we pick up in Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. It says, now Moses was tending the flock. Oh yeah, he got married. So tended the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Now Moses saw that the bush was on fire, but it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. In God's story, you can, because he is. And we're going to unpack this story, and first thing that I see here as we start walking through this story is we have to pay attention to the interruptions that happen in our life. We have to pay attention to the interruptions that happen in our life. And we don't like interruptions. Like, if we're honest, I mean, how many of you, when you go to a hotel room and you're staying, or you go to a hotel and you're staying for longer than one night, you hang a sign like this on your door? Go ahead and hit that image up there. It's like this: do not disturb, leave me alone. How many of you are do not disturb people if you're staying for more than one night? Right? And why do we do that? Like, I don't want somebody messing with my sheets. Like I'll fluff my own pillow, thank you very much. Like, I will be good. I was on a trip last week, and Trent and I were at a training, and we walked out, and I came back the next day, and my bed was made up. And I was like, oh, I forgot to hang the sign. Like, I didn't tell Trent, but I was like freaking out on the inside when I came back. I didn't want him to think I was really weirder than I already am. But we forgot to put the sign on the door, and I came back, and the bed was made up, and I was like, oh, man, somebody touched my pillows again. And, like, I was paranoid. I didn't know what would happen. Nothing was stolen or anything like that. But we like to put this don't disturb sign when we go to a hotel. But I say that because we like this for our life, too, right? Some of us, if we could get one of these really big and, like, we'd wear it around our neck, it's like, leave me alone. Like, this is my bubble. This is my space. You're not coming in. Don't disturb me. By the way, God, you see this? I got my plan for today. Don't disturb me. And so here we find Moses. He's hanging out with a sheep, and he's walking along, and he looks over and he sees the burning bush. Now, imagine if I'm Moses at first, I'm probably like, oh, burning bush. And then he keeps watching, and like, the bush is not burning up. And he keeps watching. He's like, so the text says, he says, this is a strange sight. I've never seen this before. I've never seen that before either. I would probably go walk over. So he goes over and walks to the bush, and then the bush starts talking. Like, how much more weird can this get? Like, I know, like Old Testament, you got to love it. And so Moses is here, and like, God's got his attention now. And Moses had his agenda for what he was going to do that day, and hang out with his sheep and do whatever it is he had been doing for his father-in-law. But now there's this bush. Like, this is not normal. This is not what's supposed to happen. Let me just say this. Interruptions to our lives are invitations from God. Interruptions from your lives, from our lives, they're invitations from God. They're invitations from God for us to see beyond what we normally see. Interruptions are invitations where God is saying, look, I want to show you something that you probably don't see right now. I want to talk to you for a little while. I want to teach you something about your story that you probably don't recognize yet. I want to show you something about the people around you. And if I don't interrupt your daily routine, you're not going to see this. You're going to stay focused on the things that you want to be focused on. And God says, look, I'm going to interrupt that because I have something that I want to show you. I have something that I want to teach you about myself. That's what he does to Moses. He creates this situation where his routine is interrupted. And for us to see those interruptions as invitations, something that we have to pay attention to. When our routine gets interrupted, instead of being frustrated by the interruption, maybe we should step back and say, okay, God, I want to trust that you're sovereign. What is it that you're trying to teach me right here in this moment? Because you and I are guilty of this, right? We wake up and we've already got our day planned out. Here's what's going to happen. Here's where I'm going to be. This is who I'm going to talk to. And I have no room in my life for anything extra that God wants to throw on the plate today. Not going to happen. We wake up with these preconceived ideas of what our day is going to look like. What if we could wake up with a little more open-handed approach to our day? And asking God to be the author of our day. And that, God, if you need to interrupt me to get me out of me so that I can see what it is that you're wanting to show me, like, I'm okay with that. What could our stories then start to look like if we let God be the author of our everyday? Because I believe that as he would begin to do that, we would start to really, truly believe that in God's story, I can because he is. He is what? He is in control. He's got this. And when he needs to interrupt me, then he will. Because I'm trusting in that over myself, I'm going to make it. I'm going to be okay. I can deal with the interruptions when they come, and I can actually receive them as an invitation to know God in a way that I don't yet know him. So we continue on thinking about this. In God's story, you can, I can, because he is. And just as with Moses, I think one thing that God wants us to pay attention to is the hurting people around us. The needs for us, the needs that are around us that God wants us to see. See, because what God's getting ready to do is bring Moses back to his native people. And he's getting ready to say to Moses, hey, your people, actually who you are, not this royal family that you lived in for a little while and ran away, but the family you were born into, like, they're struggling. They're hurting, Moses. And I know you're happy out here hanging out with your sheep, and there's no pressure out here, but I've got something that I need you to do. And I want you to take the focus off your comfort because I'm about to call you to do something. Maybe that's the invitation that God would give to some of us. So we continue on in the story. We jump into verse 5, chapter 3. God says to Moses, do not come any closer. Be like, okay, I've already seen a burning bush and it's talking to me. Now I'm not going to move anymore. God says, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then God said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. What we see happening here is that there's a preparation that needs to happen in all of us, and that preparation cannot be avoided. God is preparing Moses for here, and the preparation's so important. Do any of you all ever watch the show Master Chef that comes on Fox? Any cooks in here? A few people. So my boys have gotten hooked on this show. I don't know, they're 8 and 5, and like I'll walk downstairs, and they don't watch a lot of TV, but recently, like when the TV's on, they're sitting there watching Master Chef, and I'm like, of all the things you could be watching, okay, I guess there's worse things, but they're locked in on this Master Chef, and now they've started critiquing their mama's cooking, which I'm like, you better not go there. Like, she's a really good cook, but you're going to get yourself in trouble. We'll sit down at dinner, and they're like, this meal is prepared perfectly. Like, you have cooked your bread just right, Mama. And I'm like, Caden, buddy, you better watch it. Like, you think this is funny, but you better watch it. But as you watch this show, like, The basis behind the show, there's this, I can't remember, Gordon Ramsay, I think is the guy's name. He's this world-renowned chef, and he cooks this food, and he invites these people. It's a reality show, and so they have to basically cook a lot of these meals that he's made really famous in his restaurant, so there's all this pressure. And so he gives them like a 30-second, here's how you cook this meal. And then like they've got to spend the next hour or whatever actually fixing the meal. And then they come around and judge it, and they cut into it, and they bite it, and they really nitpick it apart. And he's mean sometimes and makes people cry. It's kind of sad. It's funny too. But anyway, it's all about the preparation, though. Like the preparation that leads up to that meal is so important. If they don't prepare everything right, like the lasagna is not going to be perfectly layered. It's not going to taste right. The steak's not going to be marinated just right, where you taste all the flavors and it's not overcooked. Anybody getting hungry yet? Like, I'm ready to eat. And so it's all about the preparation that leads up to that moment. And they know this on a reality show. If you can't prepare the meal, you might as well not even be on the show. And here's what comes to the story of our life. We have to understand that God is using everything in our lives to also prepare us for what's yet to come. So it's this continuing story. It's this thread that God is weaving, and it's full of preparation. It's this weird balance in that every moment is preparation, yet it's reality at the same time. Because we can look at it and say, well, God's preparing me for something great. Yeah, but if you don't pay attention to what God's doing right now, nothing else really matters. So it's about having this dual vision that says, I'm fully aware that God's working in my life in this moment, but I also know that at some point, what he's teaching me right now is probably going to have something to do with something that's going to happen later on down the road. But I can't be so focused on what's going to happen later on down the road that I miss what he's doing right now. Does that make sense? And that's the tension that he kind of lets us live in. And we can get so distracted sometimes that we miss the preparation that's happening. And that's what God's doing with Moses, is he's making sure that Moses is getting prepared, that Moses has a good understanding of who God is and what his expectations are. And God is reminding Moses, as we see here in this early part of this conversation, he's saying to Moses, look, you're at a holy place because I am God and you're not. And you need to get ready. You need to prepare yourself. And for you and I, we have to realize that yes, God is the author of our story, and he wants us to hand over the pen so that he can write the story the way that he wants. But for us to do that, we have to truly believe that he's holy and that he's God and that we're not. So he calls us continually into these moments of preparation where we just come to understand more about his holiness and who he is. That's what he says to Moses. He's like, take your sandals off. And I know that's weird. Like, why would God tell him to take his sandals off? Like, there's a lot of other things he could tell him to do. Why did he tell him to take his sandals off? Well, we don't walk around in sandals on dusty roads like they did back then. And really, in that culture back then, your feet were the dirtiest part of your body because they were typically covered with all the filth, and they had animals walking around, and there was no things weren't clean. We'll just say it like that. Things weren't clean then like they were now. And so your feet would get really, really dirty. And so I think what God was actually saying to Moses was, look, I want to touch the dirtiest. You're standing on holy ground. Like, I want the dirtiest part of you to touch me so I can get you right. And as long as you have a sandal on, there's a barrier between your holiness, between my holiness and your dirtiness, and I want to clean you up, Moses. So I need all of you touching me. I want that dirty, and to me, that's another invitation that God says, look, I want to prepare you for what's to come. There's probably some dirtiness in your life. There's probably some things that maybe ought not be there. I want to clean those up. But the way those get clean is not by you. It's not your work. So we look at our lives and we say, oh, there's no way I can ever get right and come to God. That's right, you can't, but he can, because he is. He doesn't say, get your act together and then come to me. His invitation is, come to me and I'll help you get your act together. I will do the work. So in our story, there's these seasons of preparation, and we have to realize that it is God inviting us further into his story, and this preparation that he's calling us into, this us learning to love what he loves and reject what he despises in our life because it does us more harm than it does good. We've got to trust in that God is the author of the story. And we can because he is. And we continue on and we look at this, understanding that our holiness is not this matter of an outward appearance. Holiness is not the fact that you're sitting in a church service right now in this building. Holiness is a matter of you being whole, complete with God. That's what he's wanting to work on our hearts about. And it's when we get to this matter of our heart and letting God fill us there, that's when we're moving in the direction that he wants us to move. Let's continue on with the story. Verse 9, it says, "And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me," God says, "and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." And Moses says to God, "Well, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" And God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'" In God's story, you can because he is. For you and I want us to remember that God will do a work in us, but as he does a work in us, it's going to be one that flows through us. But here's what you and I can sometimes get so focused on. We can get so focused on the work that God's going to do through us that we miss the work that he's wanting to do in us. But because God wants, I think, to be active in both, what he's going to do through us, but also what he's going to do in us, sometimes he has to invite us to see a vision that's bigger than what we currently see for our lives. You see, we get so caught up in the mundane and the routine grind of life. We get this very limited and narrow-sided, kind of self-centered, for me, view sometimes of how I interpret life, of the story that I'm living out, the story that I'm allowing to be written in my life. And so what God does sometimes is he'll interrupt us and he'll start trying to prepare us, and what he starts showing us is a vision that only we can see when he opens our eyes to it. And he does that because until we're chasing after something bigger than the ordinary, something that's actually bigger than something we can achieve ourselves, I believe we'll always be limited in the capacity that we'll be able to know God. If the vision that you're chasing after in your life, if the destination in your story is something you can obtain on your own without God, I would say it's too small. Because he's a big God and he's got a much bigger dream and a vision for your life that he wants to flesh out. But if whatever it is that's driving your life, whatever's the central theme of your story can be accomplished without God, it is too small. So sometimes he will paint a broader, bigger picture for us, and you may not know all the details of how it's going to play out as he starts to open up your eyes to it. But that's just how God works, because he will give us a glimpse of where he's taking us. And then he says, is this going to be about you or is this going to be about me? Because that was Moses' thing. Moses' questions were all like, well, what do I say? What do I tell them? And God's like, look, I am has sent you, and that's enough. Like, that's it. They'll get it. Trust me. And what he's saying in this, when he responds back, because God, he first in verse 12, he says to Moses, he's like, look, just chill. I will be with you. Like, that should be enough. But Moses is like, well, I don't know exactly what to say. And then God's like, okay, you want a little bit more? Tell them I am has sent you. Now, if I'm like Moses and I'm like, I am, what? You told me you were with me and that was good, but now like who is I am? Like, how's that going to work? What does he mean? Well, when we kind of take a look behind the scenes here of the text and what's being said, this I am that God refers to himself as is actually Yahweh. And so what Yahweh represents in God's relationship with his people, and this carries over because now we are in a covenant relationship with God through Jesus. If you're a follower of Jesus, you're in a covenant relationship with God. And Yahweh reflects the covenant name that God carries with his people. So when he says, I am, he's basically saying, look, I'm Yahweh. And what Yahweh means is that God is God, is basically what that means. That God is God. That God was not created because he is the creator. He has no beginning, he's always been. He has no end because he will always be. That is what God is saying to Moses. It's like, look, it's me. I've always been here. I'm not dependent on any human hand. I've always been here. And just as he says that to Moses to then tell to the other people, I think for you and I, he wants us to really wrestle with this and understand that he's got things he wants to do through our lives, but that has to begin with the work that he's doing in us. And I believe firmly that God won't do something through you until he's first done that in you. God's end goal is usually not what we think it is. Sometimes he'll put a vision in front of us just to perk our interest, to get us excited again. And then we go chasing full after that vision, forgetting about the one who gave us the vision. You see, when God says, here, I have this for you, I need you to go do this. I'm putting this on your heart. You don't know exactly what this looks like, but this is where you're headed. That's really not an invitation to chase after a vision. It's an invitation to chase after the vision giver, the one who invites you to be a part of that. And as you get to know him more, that's what his end game is that you would know him more. So don't miss the fact that in God's story you can because he is, but you have to become convinced that he is. And it's through that journey that we'll become more convinced that he is. And then let's skip into chapter 4. I'm just going to look at a few verses here because the story plays out. They continue this dialogue back and forth. And we're going to look at verse 1, verse 10, and verse 13 in chapter 4 because they have this conversation going back and forth. In verse 1, Moses answers and says, well, what if they do not believe me or listen to me? He's still on this soapbox. And the Lord, and said, the Lord did not appear to you. And God responds. You skip on down to verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent. Neither in the past nor present, neither in the past nor since you've spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and tongue. Going down to verse 13, Moses says, but Moses said, pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else. Moses is like, can we just cut to the point here? Like, I'd really rather you use somebody else. Have you ever been there before? You're like, you've got this opportunity in front of you, but you start counting the costs, and you're just like, I think I'll just pass. Like, God, can we just skip this? Like, I really like I'm sure Moses is like, I'd rather just hang out with the sheep. Sounds great, God. Thank you for going through all the measures you've went through to talk to me through a bush and revealing all these things about my heritage and my people. Sounds great, but I think I'll just hang out with the sheep. Can I just say this? Don't hang out with the sheep. When God puts something in front of you, let's trust him enough to go there. Because where you are, as comfortable and safe as it may feel, to not be in the middle of God's will is far more risky, actually. It's a lot more safe, even in the middle of the unknown circumstances. It's a lot more safe to be in the middle of God's will, even when you don't fully understand your circumstances. So I say it like this. You can what if your way right out of God's story. Because that's kind of what Moses is doing here. All these what ifs. What about this? What about that? What about... You can what if your way right out of God's story, but don't do it. Don't do it. In God's story, you can because he is. Don't what if your way right out of the story. Moses is on the verge of doing this, and he's just laying out excuse after excuse. And I'll just say to us this morning, because I think this is what God was wanting Moses to get. Like, God would say to us, like, don't tell me what you can't do. I just want you to trust what I can do. Don't give me all your excuses. Don't tell me all these things that you don't have confidence in about yourself. God would say, I just want you to trust me in this. Let me be the author, put the pen in my hand, let me write the story, and trust me in this. Stop with your what ifs. Like, I get them. God would say, look, I know, Moses, I know you can't talk well. God, I didn't catch God by surprise. It wasn't like God had this plan laid out, and then Moses is like, oh yeah, but God, I can't speak very good. And God's like, oh man, plan blown. What do I do now? Like, God didn't have a moment where he forgot Moses wasn't a great speaker. God just said, Moses, that's not the deal here. It's not about what you can do. It's about what I'm going to do. And I just want you to be involved in that. So don't bring God all of your inadequacies and say, God, I really don't think you can work in my life this way. He already knows those areas where you feel inadequate and maybe where you and I, where we are inadequate. But that's where he says, like, I've got a plan. I'm going to lead you through this. And even here with Moses, he begins to reveal some of those details that are there. If you go back and read, he says, look, I'm going to equip you with the things that you need. Like Moses, I'm going to make sure that you have some of the resources that you need. He gives him this stick that he can throw down on the ground and it turns into a snake. Like, that'd be cool. And so he does all these, like he says, I'm going to give you these resources. And that just reminds me in Psalm chapter 24 where it tells us that like everything in the earth is the Lord's. It's his. He has it all. The people, everything. It's all his. I was thinking Psalm 24:10. And Moses is like, well, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. And some of us, we don't walk across the street and meet our neighbors that we live beside because we're like, I don't know what to say. And God would say to you, Matthew 10:20, it's not you that speaks, but it's going to be me that speaks through you. Just open up your mouth. Trust me. Like, I've got this. We've talked about that before. Like, you don't go over and Bible thump somebody. Like, you just go over and, hi, my name is. Sorry I've lived beside you for 5 years and haven't taken time to get to know you. But like, I'm sorry about that. Like, I'd just, hi. And it may be a little awkward and weird, and you might kind of feel like Moses. But, hey, God nudges your heart. Like, take that step. God says to Moses, look, I'm going to bring people around you. Like, you ever wonder if God just finally gets aggravated with us sometimes? And it's like, I mean, he kind of does that here with Moses. I mean, God had a plan, but he's like, all right, fine. Moses, like, okay, your brother Aaron, he can do the talking. Like, but you're still going to have to speak to your brother. Like, you're not getting out of this, Moses. You're still going to have to speak to your brother. So God says, like, look, I'll bring some support alongside you. And that's the beauty of what the church is supposed to be all about. Galatians 6:2 says that we are to carry one another's burdens. And when we do that, we're actually fulfilling what Christ wants us to fulfill. See, in God's story, he's the author, and he writes the story. We can because he is. So, I end with this question. What kind of story does God want you to have? As our worship team comes up, I want you to just reflect on this. What kind of story does God want you to have? And are you willing to let him write that story? Because that's where this begins. As we jump into this series, we're going to look over the next few weeks at different people from Scripture and how God used their story underneath his grander, larger story that's playing out. So I just want to ask you to bow your heads. I'm just going to pray. And I want you to just begin to let God speak into your heart. Clarifying what it is that God's saying to you this morning. Maybe it's just a willingness to be a little more aware of the fact that God has not forgotten you. He's not left you. So Hebrews 13:8 says that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And we just need to trust that. But for us to do that, we're going to have to lay ourselves down. And we're going to have to trust. We're going to have to get ourselves out of the way and let him be God. So I don't know what that looks like for you this morning, but the good thing is God does and the Holy Spirit does, and he'll speak that right into your heart if you'll just listen.